Hi, it's me, Amir, here again, the host and curator of the Future of Islam in the Age of New Media. And today we have with us Maria Kari, not Mariah Carey, in case you were wondering. I always keep getting it wrong myself, right? Did I pronounce it correctly?
No, you got it right
Maria
the
Kari.
first time.
Okay, so Maria Kari,
Mhm.
not Mariah Carey. And Maria is a student and a journalist from Vancouver, British Columbia. And she writes for The Nation, Pakistani publications, even NPR as well. So she's done some cool stuff, and she's got some really good articles out there. You should probably go Google them up. I love the one you wrote about the 99 and comic books and Muslim superheroes. I think that was a
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I think that was a really brilliant article. So she's here with us,
The
and
political.
yeah, and you're studying law right now, right? You're in Winnipeg.
I did. I just started. I moved to Winnipeg from Vancouver,
Mm.
which was kind of a sad move, but I really like where I am now in terms of starting law school at the University of Manitoba. Second month in, and I really like it so far. But that might be subject to change.
So we were talking a little bit before, we started recording, kind of like preparing things, and you mentioned that you were born in Pakistan and then you moved to Canada, so you're not born in Canada. So you can tell us a little bit about that, how it's like being born there and then moving, and the cultural transition and how you adapted.
Yeah, yeah. So I was born in Karachi, Pakistan, and then I actually never lived there for more than a year. After that, we moved to Saudi Arabia, where my dad worked.
Mm.
So I spent a sizable amount of my life there, and then we immigrated to Vancouver. So in terms of what that experience has been like, I think it's very different from living in Canada and being a Muslim and a Pakistani here is very different from I think any place in the world really. It's very unique because Canada strongly identifies and emphasizes the fact that we are a multicultural nation. But given the current zeitgeist of just this global Islamophobia that's permeating the world, it's interesting to see how that plays out in Canada. But for the most part, I've personally not encountered anything that has taken away from my experience.
Mm.
We blend easily. We have great platforms. We have great activists that are doing tons of work in the field in terms of, work with Islam and around Islam, and then even just in the larger public sphere of activism. So no, I think it's a pretty great experience living in these metropolitan cities across Canada. And I mean, now I'm in Winnipeg,
Mm.
where there's less diversity in terms of racial backgrounds that you see. So kind of starting to get accustomed to that because I'm coming from Vancouver, which is a hub of multiculturalism.
Right. It's interesting. You talked about multiculturalism and how Canada emphasizes that, and it seems that Canada has done a really good job, with integrating people from different diverse backgrounds. Why do you think Canada succeeded, whereas countries like Germany and even recently in the UK, we heard the Prime Minister saying that multiculturalism has failed right after, like Germany basically stated that. I mean, it is kind of failing across Europe. So why did Canada do a better job? What makes you think the differences are?
Well, I think I'm going to be a little bit fair and say that some people would say Canada hasn't done a good job. We do have a history of repression of some, of other cultures and religions. And like, for instance, Aboriginal populations have experienced a lot of suffering at the hands of the Canadian government. And, we can't overlook those things. It's a very real reality. So, and similarly, we have, like you and I were talking earlier
Mm.
about how the Supreme Court is going to start reviewing the cases around legislating away the niqab. So there's a chance that we might end up taking the route that France has taken in some other European countries, So we're not completely innocent. The same problems do exist here. Some of our primary politicians have made similar comments that generate a lot of anger and resistance amongst the
Wow.
Muslims in the country. Just recently, our prime minister, said that terrorism is a very real threat. It's a very big problem here. All of these things, and on the surface, you can say that no, it isn't. What are you talking about? Is that you just like kind of taking on the rhetoric that's popular right now? Because we have a problem with that. Because constitutionally, we're protected. Our charter says we're protected, right?
Mm.
So those problems do exist,
Well, there's
but
that whole case a few years ago of the young Canadian Muslims, I think in their 20s or maybe at the very most early 30s, who there's a whole plot like they wanted to blow up some buildings.
yeah.
I'm not sure about the details. I read it a long time ago.
I've also read a long time ago, but I think they went from this city. I think it originated from Winnipeg. There was some, yeah. So like it's spread out across. I mean, it doesn't know any borders. Is that what it is? What it is? But I think that there is a really big benefit of living in a place where diversity is apparent right when you step outside of the door. And we have some really terrific organizations that have been doing work since the 60s. And they're very active.
Wow.
So, I'm part of CCMW, which is the Canadian Council for Muslim Women. And some of the stuff these women do is fantastic. So we have lawyers and journalists and other professionals who are part of this organization. And they've been so hands-on when it comes to addressing issues of Sharia that come to Canadian courts, just taking care of women's rights in terms of marriage and divorce and all of these things. So there's constantly pushback from Muslim women in these larger communities, making sure that they're protected. So we have Canadian, like the Canadian government, I think, has provided us with the tools. Like, here's the Constitution, here's the Charter, here's what you're protected as, and we have Muslims that are constantly using these tools. And I think that's what really helps our case on an international level.
Right. Well, that sounds cool. So let's get into your 1-minute take, your roughly 60-second take that you gave during the audio seminar. You talked a lot about this whole theme of Islam 2.0 and the new golden age of Islam and the age of new media. Let me just read a portion of what you said. It's a rough transcript. I hope I get it completely right. So let's see. These first Muslim golden ages might be gone, but a new one has been born. One that promises to serve as a more permanent and durable lab of these ideas, dreams, and ideals. New media chronicles innovation in the Muslim world. It archives the insights of some of our best thinkers, writers, and activists. And it more effectively tells the story of our work. For every zone of crisis in the Islamic world, there is a promising center of innovation. And new media is becoming that meeting place. It's an intersection where new ideas are being born by the hour or being disseminated by the minute. You no longer need to be an expert. You can simply tell the story through your medium, in which Islam has a leading role. Okay, I think that's a wrong little typo in the transcript there. But anyways, people get the idea. You really think that new media is this awesome, great thing, and it's ushering in sort of this new age of new Islamic golden age and Islam 2.0. And I agree with you. I think it's very obvious new media has a lot of wonderful benefits, and it is doing a lot of them. And here we are, I'm recording this interview on Skype, and people will be watching it on YouTube. It's on a blog. We met on Twitter. We're now on Facebook. So media is definitely a cool thing. But don't you think this is kind of a little too grand?
A little too optimistic to call it the golden age? Yeah, I mean, I think that when you're living in the times, it's always a little grand to look around you and say that, hey, this is what's happening. Like, I don't know if we would go back to transport ourselves to the 7th century and look around, Baghdad and Persia and Muslim Spain and say, this is the golden age of Islam that we're in right now. But I think in hindsight, maybe we're able to do that more easily because we see some of the product right there in front of us and say, hey, this is great, And like, if you think about it, we know that back in the day, Arabs, they figured out like the circulation of the blood and how blood flows in the human body, and they did that whole thing with zeros. And we know these things now, and we're able to say, wow, those were some of the greatest scientists and thinkers and innovators of that time. And they were Muslim, and that's so cool. But I mean, if you go into like your teenager's room and he's plugged into the internet, or he or she, and if you're able to kind of like access what, for our parents it's hard to see sometimes because they're not plugged in as much as we are, but they're sometimes really blown away by some of the things that we create using these tools. So of course it might be too grandiose to be as optimistic as I am about it, and that might be the reason I'm so optimistic is because I am a product of that generation, and that's how I kind of get my message across in terms of my writing, in terms of any activist related work or interest I have. So since that's my medium, I value it, but I think that there's a lot to be said about these millions of Muslims who are plugged in, and they're leaving this binary trail of like ones and zeros, and they're riding this, we're at the very top of the crest of this digital tidal wave, you know? And it almost makes it like, it kind of makes your identity more cohesive. Like, I am Muslim and I'm doing all this, but at the same time, it negates the need for such an identity. You almost become part of this global village, this global digital village. And I think that's great, that's special, and it's necessary sometimes to kind of remove that polarity of us and them, to just be connected in so many ways. You're turning on your AC, I'm shutting my windows because it's really cold. Here we are in real time. So,
yeah,
I think there's a lot of value to be able to politicize, philosophize, and bring science into the religion and be able to disseminate all of this through this medium.
Well, what I'm hearing is that, many people see these technologies and these changes and evolutions, but they don't really realize their significance. And even us, we could be immersed in social media a lot of the time, and for us, we take it for granted, and it's just, it becomes the new norm, and it is the norm for us. It's not the new norm; it already is a norm.
Yeah.
But we lose sight of how significant these technologies are, and how they've changed things. And you're right. I mean, look at us here right now doing this interview. But it's very interesting what you mentioned about identity, because you're right. Social media allows you to transcend national boundaries and transcend your own religious and ethnic identity, and sort of find this global cultural identity, and you're able to relate to other people from different parts of the world, even though they're so different from you. I remember recently on Twitter, you've got Occupy Wall Street, you've got the protests that were happening in Spain recently, protests currently happening in Greece, and they're all different people are using different hashtags. But it's so funny that you've got these activists all over the world, but somehow the grievances are the same, the frustration, at a basic level is really the same. And there is that empathy, you develop that sense of empathy, and then there's that sense of solidarity. And that's what social media allows us to do. But, so that's for protesting things like corruption, the global economic crisis. What about Islam itself? I had some resistance from people saying, well, you shouldn't have titled the audio seminar "The Future of Islam in the Age of New Media," because, Islam doesn't really change. Islam is the same, always has been, always will be. I mean, they didn't state it that way, but that's really their basic point.
Right.
In your from your perspective, would you say that social media is impacting Muslim communities? And obviously it is, okay? Or would you even go as far as saying that social media isn't just impacting Muslim communities? No, it's actually impacting Islam itself, in some shape or form. It goes beyond the Muslim communities.
Yeah, I mean, I completely understand what you're saying. There's a real danger when all of a sudden you're so plugged in, and there's so many different voices, there's so much noise, and sometimes it's hard to know. Just today I saw somebody put up a quote by Abraham Lincoln, and it was the problem with the internet is you never know who, if the quote is right or not, who actually quoted it, and then they quoted it as Abraham Lincoln, and that was clearly not him. But it just kind of shows that you just don't know what's valid, what's real, what's true. And if you're disseminating information about religion or under the banner of Islam, that's very problematic. But you can't avoid that. That's become the reality now. I talked a little bit about in an article I did following your conference. So I did an article for Alu magazine in The Nation, and we looked at a little bit about how when I went to Pakistan, I saw that some of our cafes have been turned into internet cafes. And, this is happening across Cairo and other places in the Middle East, where these places are just springing up, where books are being replaced, libraries are being taken out, and it's just a bunch of computer screens. And you pay and sit there, and you either, find love, you run your blog, I don't know, you do countless things on the internet. And I think it's a scary thing, and it's a great thing, it's a wonderful thing, and it's going to be very interesting to see what kind of mark we leave. Do you know what I mean? And of course there are some negatives to it when you're taking a religion that is already so divided and fragmenting it even further. It's a very big risk that you run, because there is no authority. There's nobody to police what is being said. But maybe at the same time that's necessary, because taking that power from, those institutions and those sage wisdom scholars that we've always kind of revered, maybe taking that power and kind of having, a dialogue, like a healthy dialogue. I don't see anything wrong with that. But of course, it's porous. Like the borders can be crossed, the boundaries can be crossed just too easily.
So what you're basically saying, because one of the things that you just mentioned is that, I mean, already as it is, Islam is already, it's kind of so divided. Muslim communities are already divided. They've got, you've got different sects, different perspectives, and new media is just sort of increasing that. I mean, even here, Reza Aslan, at the end of his take, this is what he said. I think, looking forward, I think that we're going to find an even more eclectic Islam, which is a good thing. And you could tell that he really meant it. He loves the fact that social media and globalization, Islam is getting more and more eclectic, which is a good thing. I do find that it is a good thing, but it does leave us with the question of, authoritative leaders. Okay, so as it gets more and more eclectic, where are the authoritative voices? Because we don't want to have just, tons of diversity and people all speaking and ranting for themselves. Then, then the tradition starts to kind of wither away. The depth of the argument starts to, just fall apart, and you have a lot of ranting voices.
Yeah. But I mean, my counter argument to that would be it happens on some level on the streets, and it's been happening for years and years. This fragmentation, this division has always existed since the birth of Islam. And I don't know, we've managed to somehow successfully spread this message of division through the generations, centuries, countries, oceans, without social media up until this point. How much worse is social media really going to make it?
What do you mean, we've managed to spread this message of division?
Well, because division has always existed. It's always been a very real reality, right? When you start learning about Islam as a child, you learn that message of there's these different sectors. In some countries it's more pronounced that you learn that message because it's a very real reality in the country's political kind of makeup. But for instance, I wasn't aware of it until I moved here, that there's different kinds of Muslims. In Saudi Arabia, it was more of like a controlled environment.
It's so funny, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, it wasn't a thing until someone asked me, well, what kind of Muslim are you? And I just, till this day, I hate that question and refuse to answer it. I don't,
right.
I don't even know how I would answer it. But we've managed to have this problem exist without social media. It's only in the last maybe decade that people are plugged in so actively, maybe even less than that, I would say. And
social media has kind of made it more apparent.
It's made it apparent, but you know what? I don't necessarily see something wrong with it being apparent. And I really mean this, coming from a place like Pakistan where people are so, lives are at risk. I think that finding a place, a refuge for some, there's nothing wrong with that, Finding a place where maybe you can sit and communicate with people who maybe share your view, whatever your view is. If you're coming from a minority sector in a country and you're able to plug in with other people in that country or, with the global community, I see some benefit in that. And being able to inform and instruct yourself on the differences, that's also important. So you don't blindly hate or kill under, you're able to go on and inform yourself hey, this is what it really means, because that knowledge is available to you. It's a couple clicks away, right? So you're not as indoctrinated by what society has always kind of believed. Maybe you're able to better form your own opinion. There's that value of knowledge, I think, to be found on the web.
Right. So to sum up your answer, social media is impacting Muslim community in numerous ways. We can go on and on and on about that. And one of the key ways is that's making Muslim communities more and more diverse, and social media, it makes that apparent. But in terms of social media's impact on Islam, we're having a more and more eclectic Islam, basically.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we run the real risk of Islam losing its coherent meaning almost, because there's just going to be so much meaning. and there's going to be so many different people who can advocate for that meaning.
Hmm. See, right now, like in terms of the interpretations and the differences, people talk about things like the hijab, democracy, Islamic law. Like those are the really contentious issues, and I think that will always be the case, right? But as long as you have core, doctrines or philosophies and aspects, things like let's say that the five pillars of Islam, the six
Yeah.
pillars of faith, things that are really core to the faith and to the tradition, as long as that remains, for me, I think it's not going to be much of a major issue. But what I'm already starting to notice is that there are more and more people even questioning such basic
So
things. And when it comes to that, then you begin to question and ask, okay,
yeah,
is this a growing trend? I don't know. I don't think so. I think that would just be really an alarmist way of putting it. But there are
yeah,
definitely some.
but it
Yeah,
exists,
it
and
exists, and there are some people.
maybe that's why I wouldn't voice so much excitement over this eclectic brand of Islam that we're talking about. I don't know if I would share that excitement. I would be very reluctant to approach it and to even know what that even connotes, right?
Hmm.
But at the same time, I would say that our holy book, the Quran, um, it discusses science, right? So we have it laid out, the reproductive system, for instance, or how the calendar works, all of these like technological kind of scientific things that were later discovered by the Western world, and we're like, oh, this is what actually happens, and it was like, that was laid out many, many years ago. So I think there is space for technology, and I think there is space for science and for innovation, and there's a respect for it, and there's some hopes that you can pin on it. So I think there's a positive and a negative to everything, and I think finding that balance along the continuum is a very difficult thing, but it can be done, and I think a lot of people do successfully do it.
Right, but
And
given your 1 minute take on what you said, you're clearly optimistic.
yeah, and I remain optimistic, but I think even with your optimism, you're always a little bit wary of
There's a bit of I mean, it's a lot of optimism, but part of it is a cautious optimism.
yeah. Because I mean, it changes every day, right? Every day that you tune in to your Twitter feed or whatever it is that you keep track of, there's always something that takes you back. You're always a little bit like, oh, like what did you just say? Or maybe I don't agree with that. So, and hey, maybe that's what leads to more knowledge.
Right.
Maybe that's what continues the whole process of constantly searching and searching, like literally searching the internet for the true meaning of things.
Well, I can kind of also get into my opinion, but I don't want to do that because this is supposed to be about your opinion. And we do have to wrap up. But before I do that, is there anything you want to mention quickly, a key insight that you want to offer to people tuning in and watching this video right now?
Key insight.
Or just an
My
opinion, just a comment.
I think I think it would be to kind of recognize that maybe there has already been a shift away from this notion that we've always had of the clash of civilizations, this war of religions, and to maybe even realize that maybe that's found a new frontier, but also the fact that we're very digitally connected, and it's not just Muslims that are connected, it's the whole world. So we can kind of diffuse this notion of this clash of civilizations by realizing that one civilization exists, and by plugging into that, you're able to diffuse a lot of animosity and to portray and present yourself and spread your message, whatever that message is, in a much astute manner, and to utilize that. I mean, I would say there's so much you can do and to do it.
Nice.
Thank you.
Hey, Maria, thank you very much, and good talking to you.